When a white officer told her, "This isn't a place for people like you," everything changed. It was a humid afternoon in Atlanta, the kind of day when the air hung heavy like wet cloth, and even the squirrels moved slowly. The summer heat radiated off the sidewalks in waves, and Grant Park, normally filled with joggers, families, and yoga enthusiasts, had taken on a slower rhythm. The cicadas screamed in the trees, and the clouds above looked like they were holding back a storm that might or might not come. Tamara Jenkins sat alone on a bench near the old gazebo at the southern end of the park. She had chosen that spot for a reason. It wasn't too close to the playground, nor to the dog park. It was quiet, partially shaded by a massive oak tree, and offered a clear view of the small duck pond, where a few geese floated lazily. She came there to think. To breathe. To escape. Tamara was 36, a single black woman with a master's degree in urban planning and a soul worn down by 1,000 small paper cuts inflicted by life in a city that still carried echoes of its segregated past. She worked long hours for the city of Atlanta, drafting proposals for housing equality and zoning laws that no one in power truly cared to enforce. She had spent her morning in yet another boardroom with old white men who talked over her ideas and praised them only when someone else repeated them. This bench was her retreat. Her peace. Her right. She wore a plain white t-shirt and a pair of olive cargo pants. Her long dreadlocks were tied back into a low bun, and she carried a faded red canvas tote bag, filled with books and notebooks and a thermos of iced tea. She was sketching something, an idea for a community housing initiative, when she noticed the presence. The sound of boots. Not sneakers, not flip-flops, boots. Heavy, purpose-driven steps. She didn't even need to look up. She could feel the authority pressing down on her skin like an invisible thumb. "Ma'am." She looked up. A tall, square-jawed police officer stood in front of her, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting the soft glimmer of the pond. His hand rested casually on his belt, inches from his holster. He was white, probably mid-40s, broad-shouldered with a buzz cut and a tan that said he spent more time outside than in. His badge read B. Whitaker. "Yes?" Tamara replied calmly, though she could already feel her throat tightening. "I need you to move along, ma'am," he said, his tone clipped, rehearsed. She blinked. "I'm sorry? We've had some complaints. People say there's someone loitering around this end of the park, making them uncomfortable." She looked around. The area was nearly empty. An older woman was walking a golden retriever in the distance. A pair of teenagers sat on the grass with earbuds in. That was it. "I've been sitting here. Writing. That's all," Tamara replied, keeping her voice level. "Do you have ID on you?" She stared at him. Her heart sank into that familiar pit, a mix of disbelief and exhaustion. "Am I being detained?" He didn't answer that. "It's a public safety check. You can either show your ID and explain what you're doing here, or you can be cited for loitering." "I work for the city of Atlanta," she said firmly, reaching slowly into her tote bag. "And I have every right to be here." She handed him her ID. He scanned it, then studied her like she was some kind of anomaly. "Ms. Jenkins, do you often come to this part of the park alone? Is that a crime?" He didn't smile. Didn't joke. Didn't explain. "I'm just doing my job," he muttered. "No, you're abusing your badge," she replied, eyes locked on him. His jaw clenched. He handed her ID back without a word. She stood up, but not because he told her to. Because she knew that staying would only escalate things, and there were no cameras here. No witnesses. No body cam footage that would ever see the light of day if things went sideways. As she walked away, she felt the heat burning behind her eyes. Not from fear. From rage. Silent, suffocating rage. She went home and wrote about it. Posted it to a blog she hadn't updated in months. She didn't expect it to go viral. But it did. Within days, her story was shared across Atlanta. Urban planner harassed by police while sitting in public park. Local news stations called her. Civil rights groups invited her to speak. She didn't want the spotlight, but something inside her clicked. She'd lived her whole life quietly pushing through, swallowing indignities. But not anymore. Officer Brian Whitaker, meanwhile, was placed on temporary desk duty pending an internal review. He claimed he was only following procedure, doing what he was trained to do. His union backed him. The department offered a non-apology. We regret any discomfort caused and are reviewing policy. Discomfort. That word haunted Tamara. She was tired of being a walking discomfort. Of her skin being a warning sign. Of her presence being a threat. But that day on the bench would change more than her. It would change him too. Though she didn't know it yet, the same officer who tried to erase her from that park would later need her more than he ever imagined. And somehow, somewhere in the ashes of that humiliation, a strange kind of bridge would begin to form. But not yet. Not today. Today, the wound was still fresh. The bench was still empty. And the storm clouds, finally, began to break. 3 years had passed since the day Tamara Jenkins was asked to leave that park bench like she was a trespasser in her own city. 3 years since her blog post exploded across Atlanta, since her inbox flooded with support, interviews, and hate mail. Since she'd stood on stages she never wanted, speaking words she never thought would resonate with so many. Since she became something of a local figure in the world of community justice and racial equity. And yet, no matter how much time passed, the sting of that day never completely faded. Tamara had changed, though not by choice. Her hair was shorter now, twisted into shoulder-length coils that framed her face in a sharp halo. Her wardrobe had sharpened, too, tailored jackets, heels when she wanted to command a room, and long braids of quiet fire in her words. She wasn't just a city planner anymore. She was director of urban equity initiatives for the entire metro region. Her apartment had changed too, from a tiny walk-up on Edgewood to a mid-size condo in East Lake. But some nights, when the city lights shimmered on her ceiling like they were made of ghosts, she still thought of that bench. Of the man with mirrored sunglasses. Of the way her name sounded when spoken with suspicion. Officer Brian Whitaker. She hadn't seen him since. She never wanted to. Meanwhile, in a house on the other side of Atlanta, Brian Whitaker sat on the edge of a hospital bed, his uniform jacket crumpled in his lap. His hands were shaking. Not from fear. From helplessness. His wife, Dana, had been fighting stage 3 ovarian cancer for 8 months now. The chemo was wearing her down. Their savings had thinned, and even with insurance, the bills kept coming like they had teeth. Their daughter, Emma, was only 9. Too young to understand why Mom couldn't get out of bed some days. Too young to know why Dad seemed angrier all the time. Brian had changed, too. Not all at once. But enough that he could feel it when he looked in the mirror. After the incident at Grant Park, his department had reassigned him to administrative duty. For 3 months, he sat behind a desk, filing reports and learning how quickly the system ate its own. The review board eventually cleared him, no wrongdoing found. But the press didn't forget, and neither did Atlanta's communities of color. He returned to the streets with a new partner. People glared at him differently now. Like they knew. Like he was stained. Some wouldn't let him in their shops. Others filmed him during routine stops. A few just stared in silence as if waiting for him to mess up again. And maybe that was what shook him most. Because deep down, he had started to wonder if they were right. The things he used to dismiss, the language, the looks, the way his own department talked about certain neighborhoods, started to feel more visible. Real. And now, sitting in that cold, sterile hospital room, none of it mattered. He was just a man with a sick wife, a scared daughter, and no roadmap for what came next. He stood up and paced, rubbing the back of his neck. "Hey, Daddy." Emma peeked into the room. "Mom's sleeping. Can I go play with my iPad in the lobby?" He nodded, trying to smile. "Yeah, sweetheart. Just stay where I can see you, okay?" "Okay." She skipped off, a small miracle wrapped in pink sneakers. Brian sat back down. His fingers hovered over his phone. He had a list, names of support organizations, foundations, clinics that might offer financial aid. But he didn't know where to start. And then, like fate had a cruel sense of irony, he saw a name. Tamara Jenkins. Director, Urban Equity Initiatives, City of Atlanta. His heart stopped. He hadn't heard that name in years. But he remembered every syllable. She was now heading one of the grant foundations providing emergency community support for underfunded families in crisis. Families like his. He stared at the name, unsure whether to laugh or cry. He could skip over it. Pretend he hadn't seen it. Pick another organization. Another form. But none of the others had enough pull. None of them had real city money behind them. And Tamara did. The irony of it all nearly broke him. He clicked the link. Filled out the application. Didn't mention his name, just Dana's diagnosis, Emma's age, their financial situation. He submitted it and closed his laptop like it was a casket. A week later, Tamara's assistant knocked on her office door, holding a red folder. "This just came through the emergency grant line. One of the harder cases I've seen this month." Tamara took it, flipping through the paperwork, her pen ready to sign. Stage 3 cancer. Medical debt. Young daughter. The file was clear, well written. Honest. She was about to stamp it, approved, when her eyes landed on the emergency contact line. Applicant's spouse, Brian Whitaker. She froze. Her hand trembled slightly. No way. No, that Brian Whitaker? She read it again. Officer Brian Whitaker. The same name. Same age. Address in East Point. The man who once made her feel invisible now needed her to see him. Tamara leaned back in her chair. A storm of thoughts swirled inside her. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. She could deny the application. Send it to another office. Let someone else decide. But she didn't. She picked up the phone and called her assistant. "I want to schedule a visit. In person. No press. Just me." "To the family?" "Yes." The assistant hesitated. "You sure?" Tamara's voice was calm but firm. "Yes." "Tell them I'd like to meet the Whitakers next week." 1 week later. Brian answered the door, wearing jeans and a gray hoodie. His eyes were hollow, and his posture sagged like a man who hadn't slept in days. When he saw her standing there, clipboard in hand, wearing a navy blazer and black heels, he nearly dropped his coffee. "Tamara Jenkins?" She nodded. "Jesus," he muttered, stepping back. "You're the woman you asked to leave a park bench?" "Yes." He looked down, ashamed. Tamara's eyes scanned the small house behind him. It smelled like antiseptic and worry. Emma peeked out from the hallway, clutching a stuffed panda. "I read your application," Tamara said, stepping inside. "Let's talk." Brian said nothing. The past, the pain, the bench, all of it hung in the air like unfinished business. The living room was modest but clean, as if someone had tried too hard to make it feel normal. A worn beige couch faced a small television. The coffee table bore the scars of years, marker doodles, chipped wood, a coaster with "World's Best Dad" faded on its surface. A stack of unopened medical bills sat neatly in a tray, too thick to ignore but too painful to open. Tamara stood near the window, her clipboard now tucked under her arm like a shield. Brian offered her a seat, but she remained standing. It wasn't defiance. It was distance. Safety. Maybe even control. "You didn't have to come," Brian finally said, his voice rough. "You could have just denied the application and moved on. I wouldn't have blamed you." She looked at him. "But you would have known I did it. And I would have known I did it. That's not how I work." Brian nodded slowly, rubbing his hands together. He looked older than his 42 years, not just in the creases on his forehead or the graying stubble on his chin, but in the way he held his body, like someone always bracing for impact. Tamara's eyes drifted to a picture frame on the mantel, a photo of a smiling woman with warm eyes and a vibrant scarf tied around her head. She was sitting in a garden with a little girl on her lap. The girl had Brian's eyes. Your wife? Tamara asked gently. Dana, Brian replied, following her gaze. She was a florist. Loved sunflowers. Could never keep them alive, though. Tamara allowed herself a small smile. That's oddly comforting. Even florists struggle. Yeah, he said with a sad chuckle. That was Dana. Tried to make everything bloom. He paused, then sighed. She's not doing well. Chemo's draining her. The insurance barely covers anything. We've sold her car, emptied our savings. I'm holding everything together with duct tape and coffee. Tamara listened, but her silence was not passive. It was measured. Intentional. She wanted to hear the man behind the uniform. And for the first time, he let her. I was wrong that day, he said suddenly, his voice low. At the park. I was angry. Not at you. At the world. At myself. But I took it out on you, and I've thought about it every day since. Tamara didn't answer immediately. Her eyes moved slowly to his face. You didn't just take it out on me, Brian. You made me feel like I didn't belong. Like my presence, my peace, was an inconvenience. Do you know what that does to someone? He looked down. I do now, he murmured. Silence stretched between them, thick like molasses. Tamara finally sat, placing her clipboard on the table. I didn't come here to shame you, she said. But I won't pretend like that day didn't matter. It changed things. For both of us. Brian nodded. Emma wandered into the room then, barefoot and holding a drawing. She looked up at Tamara with curiosity. Are you the helper lady? She asked. Tamara smiled. I suppose I am. Emma climbed into her father's lap and held up the paper. I drew a superhero family. That's me, that's Mommy, and that's Daddy. Tamara took the drawing gently. It's beautiful. Your mommy's hair looks like fire. She says it's her fighter hair. Tamara's throat tightened. Well, your mom sounds like a warrior. She is, Brian whispered, kissing the top of Emma's head. Tamara stayed a while longer. They reviewed the grant criteria, the home care costs, the hospital invoices. She asked about Dana's treatment plan and offered to connect them with a second opinion specialist through a city initiative. But none of that carried as much weight as what wasn't said. When Tamara rose to leave, Brian followed her to the door. He hesitated before speaking again. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. But if there's ever a way I can make things right. Tamara looked him in the eye. Then start with your daughter, she interrupted. Raise her better than the system raised you. And with that, she was gone. 2 weeks later. The grant was approved. Dana received immediate home care support. An oncology nurse began weekly visits. Emma was enrolled in a city-sponsored art therapy program. A small check arrived to help cover the utility backlog. Tamara's name was on none of it. No press releases. No public statements. But one morning, as she walked to her car, she found a small bouquet of paper sunflowers tucked beneath her windshield wiper. A note was scrawled on the back in familiar handwriting. Thank you for sitting with me, even when you didn't have to. B.W. Tamara held the paper flowers for a moment, the weight of it all resting in her hands. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't closure. But maybe, just maybe, it was the start of something that could bloom. The April rain fell in soft sheets, soaking the cracked sidewalks of Decatur. The air smelled like damp concrete and magnolia. Inside her small office at the Department of Social Welfare, Tamara stared at her computer screen. But she wasn't working. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, frozen. She had just read the news. Another unarmed black teenager, this time only 15, was shot by an off-duty cop in South Carolina. The boy was mistaken for someone else. Wrong place. Wrong time. Same old story. Tamara felt like she couldn't breathe. She rose from her chair, opened the small window behind her, and leaned out, letting the cool air slap her face. But even the wind couldn't calm the buzzing in her ears. It was always this way, pain like an echo. A crime in one city shook mothers, sisters, social workers, and others. Trauma linked by blood and skin. Her phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. "This is Brian. Hope you're okay. I saw the news. Thought of you." She stared at it for a long time. That evening, Tamara parked outside her apartment. The neighborhood was modest, single-story homes, a playground with a swing set that squeaked in the breeze. As she gathered her bag, she noticed a car idling near the curb. The engine purred like a threat. The window rolled down. A man with a navy ball cap and sunglasses leaned out. "You Tamara Clark?" She blinked. "Who's asking?" He flashed a badge. "Not police. Private security. Corporate. We've been asked to deliver a message. Your involvement with the Watkins family is being scrutinized. You may want to step back before this affects your position." He drove off before she could speak. Tamara stood frozen in the driveway, the evening suddenly heavy. The Watkins family. Dana. Brian. Of course. The grant she pushed through had ruffled feathers. One of the board members, a known hardliner with a history of suppressing minority aid programs, had opposed it from the beginning. Now someone was digging into her past, her record, her relationships. And the message was clear: back off. Or be buried. The next day, she did something unexpected. She called Brian. He answered on the second ring, out of breath. "Tamara? We need to talk," she said. "In person." They met at a diner in Midtown. The kind with red vinyl booths and jukeboxes at each table. Rain tapped gently on the windows, but inside it was warm, almost too warm. Brian looked different. He had trimmed his beard, lost weight, and his uniform was gone. He was in a brown hoodie and jeans. Civilian. Tamara ordered coffee black. Brian just had water. "They came to my house," she began, voice low. "Private security. Someone's trying to push me out of my job." Brian's eyes widened. "Why?" "Because I helped your family. Because I didn't play by their rules. Because I dared to be human." He sat back, silent. "Do you know anyone who could be behind this?" she asked. Brian sighed. "Yeah. The grant board chair. Henderson. We clashed more than once when I was on the force. He's old school, hates change. Hates being told he's wrong. Especially by a black woman." Tamara smirked bitterly. "How original." Brian leaned forward. "Let me help. Let me talk to someone." "No," Tamara said firmly. "You've got enough to deal with. Dana's health. Emma." Brian's jaw tightened. "And you've got people threatening you for doing your damn job. That's not okay. I owe you, Tamara." She looked at him. "No," she said softly. "You don't know me. But you do have a choice." Over the next few weeks, things got worse. Tamara was pulled from 2 major projects. Emails went unanswered. Meetings were rescheduled without her. A colleague warned her privately. "They're setting you up. Trying to build a paper trail." But Tamara didn't fold. She gathered her own evidence. Every warning, every threat, every deleted calendar invite, she documented it all. Meanwhile, Brian was changing. He joined a community outreach program for former officers. He began speaking at town halls, sharing his journey. He publicly denounced Henderson's influence in a controversial op-ed titled, "From the Badge to the Bench, What a Black Woman Taught Me About Justice." The piece went viral. Tamara read it alone in her apartment one night. She cried, not because she needed his validation, but because it was rare to be seen. Truly seen. Then came the moment that would test them both. On a Saturday afternoon, Tamara exited a grocery store and noticed a man tailing her. She'd seen him before, outside the welfare office, by her car, now here. She tried to lose him in the parking lot, but he closed in. "Miss Clark," he hissed. "Drop the case. Walk away. Or next time, we won't be so polite." He grabbed her arm. Before she could react, another man tackled him from the side, hard. It was Brian. The two men struggled briefly, but Brian had years of training. He pinned the attacker until police arrived. Tamara stood stunned, shaken, her groceries spilled across the pavement. Brian stood slowly, his own lip bleeding. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded wordlessly. When the police questioned them, Brian didn't back down. He gave a full statement, named names, and requested protection for Tamara. That night, she couldn't sleep. Brian had risked everything, again. And this time, not out of guilt. Out of conviction. The next morning, she received an internal email. Henderson had been suspended pending investigation. An ethics probe was underway. Her record had been cleared. She sat at her desk stunned. Then she received a photo from Brian. It was Emma, holding a handmade sign. "Thank you, Ms. T. Mommy's getting stronger. Daddy's getting better. You made it happen." Beneath the photo was a simple message. "When you sat on that bench, you didn't walk away. Now it's my turn not to." Tamara smiled through tears. The Georgia heat was thick and relentless. Even in the evening, the air hung heavy like a wet blanket. On the second floor of her Decatur apartment, Tamara lay on her couch, one arm over her forehead, the TV playing some political debate she wasn't really listening to. Her phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, community activists, Brian. But she didn't answer any of them. She was exhausted, in a way that didn't feel normal. For weeks, she'd been pushing through headaches, fatigue, and waves of nausea. At first, she chalked it up to stress, to long hours and pressure. But now, it was undeniable. She was sick. And this time, she knew something wasn't right. A week later, after much resistance, she finally walked into Grady Memorial Hospital for tests. The fluorescent lights in the waiting room made her skin look pale, almost gray. The nurse took her vitals and frowned. "Your blood pressure's sky high. And you're running a fever." Tamara forced a smile. "Guess I'm just passionate about social justice." The nurse didn't laugh. Several hours later, a young doctor with kind eyes entered the room holding a clipboard that suddenly felt heavier than the walls. "Miss Clark," he said carefully, "we're seeing some abnormalities in your blood work. Your white cell count is elevated, and there's an inflammatory marker we're concerned about." Tamara sat up. "What are you saying?" He looked at her gently. "You need to see a specialist. Immediately." She didn't call Brian. Not for 2 days. Not when she sat on her bathroom floor crying after vomiting for the 4th time. Not when she woke up sweating at 3 a.m., her sheets soaked. Not when she stared at her reflection in the mirror and saw someone she barely recognized. Tired, gaunt, vulnerable. But Brian called her. Over and over. Finally, on a Thursday afternoon, she picked up. Her voice was thin. "Hey." There was silence on the other end. Then, "Tamara? Are you okay?" She laughed, but it cracked mid-breath. Define okay. He was at her door within 40 minutes. Brian had seen many things in his life: crime scenes, blood, broken bodies. But nothing prepared him for the sight of Tamara curled on her couch, wrapped in a blanket, her skin pale, her eyes glassy. "You need to go back to the hospital," he said immediately. "No," she murmured. "I have too much work." "Tamara. No more excuses. You saved me when I was too proud to admit I was broken. Let me return the favor." She looked at him. Truly looked. And for the first time in days, she let herself cry. The next month blurred into a cycle of hospital visits, biopsies, scans, and specialists. The final diagnosis came in the form of a single-page document. Autoimmune hepatitis. Her own immune system was attacking her liver. Untreated, it could progress to liver failure. Medication could help, but side effects were brutal. A transplant might one day be necessary. Tamara tried to take the news with grace. She failed. She withdrew from work, from her community, even from Brian. But Brian didn't let her go. He drove her to appointments. Sat with her through chemo-like immunosuppressant infusions. Cooked bland meals when her appetite disappeared. Picked up her prescriptions. At night, he'd sit on the floor next to her couch, reading out loud from her favorite Toni Morrison novels, his deep voice weaving through pain like a balm. And sometimes, when she felt like giving up, he reminded her of that day in the park. "You didn't walk away from me, remember?" he'd whisper. "You didn't move when I tried to erase you. So now I'm not moving either." One evening, she asked him, "Why do you keep showing up?" Brian looked at her for a long time. "Because I saw what love looked like, and it looked like you sitting on that bench, refusing to move for anyone." It wasn't just Brian who stepped up. Emma, now 8 years old, made Tamara a bracelet with her name on it. Dana, still recovering, but stronger now, sent her healing teas and gentle letters. Former clients of Tamara's wrote emails, left voicemails, sent flowers. The very community she once held up now lifted her. She wasn't used to it. Tamara had always been the strong one, the one who carried others. Now she had to be carried. It broke her in the most beautiful way. One night, lying on a hospital bed, for attached, Tamara whispered to Brian, "I used to believe healing was something you gave others. I never realized it was something you had to allow for yourself." Brian held her hand. "You taught me that. Now it's your turn." They didn't kiss. There was no dramatic music. Just two people, broken in different ways, holding on to the same lifeline. Each other. By September, her condition had stabilized. The meds were working, though her body ached constantly. But Tamara was fighting, and for once, not just for others. For herself. At a city fundraiser that fall, she made her first public appearance since the diagnosis. She wore a cream-colored headwrap, gold earrings, and a navy dress. She stood at the podium and looked out at a crowd of hundreds, community leaders, activists, families she'd helped. And Brian. He was in the back, arms crossed, smiling. Tamara cleared her throat and began. 2 years ago, I was told to get off a bench in a public park. Today, I stand before you, not just as someone who stayed seated, but as someone who learned how to stand back up with help." The room was silent. Then it erupted in applause. Tears. Clapping. A standing ovation. She stepped down, breath caught in her chest. Brian met her halfway. And for the first time, they embraced not as a former cop and a woman he once wronged, but as partners in something far deeper. Redemption. 3 years had passed. The seasons had turned with quiet resilience, like old songs on the radio. Tamara now lived in Charleston, a city of porches, jasmine breezes, and a rhythm that felt slower, more forgiving. She rented a small cottage on the east side of town, near Hampton Park. It wasn't flashy. Just quiet. Safe. Green. Every morning, she'd walk to the park with her journal, herbal tea, and wear her favorite wide-brimmed straw hat. Her body still bore signs of the battle she had fought: thinner hair, joint pain, a deep scar on her abdomen from a liver biopsy. But her smile was real now. It didn't hurt to wear. This morning, the bench was waiting for her under the blooming crepe myrtles. She sat down slowly, let the air settle, and wrote. April 22nd. Today is the anniversary. 3 years to the day. I remember the anger in his voice. I remember my fingers gripping the edge of the wood like they were holding onto something much bigger than a seat. I didn't know then that staying seated would change everything. She paused. Looked up. A little boy rode past on a red scooter, laughing. His mother jogged behind him, calling his name. Jonas! Slow down! Tamara smiled. Life moved. Even after the worst. That night, she received a call. Brian. She hadn't heard his voice in nearly a year. After Tamara's recovery, he'd decided to make a major life change, moving to Chicago, where he started working with a restorative justice nonprofit. He'd enrolled in night classes, studied community psychology, traveled, spoke on panels about rethinking policing, racial equity, trauma. They kept in touch, Christmas cards, birthday texts, occasional late-night calls when the world felt heavy, but life had pulled them in different directions. Still, Hearing his voice again felt like stepping into warm light. Tamara, he said softly, I'm in Charleston. For the conference. She stood up from her kitchen stool, breath catching. You're here? I was wondering if we could meet. The next morning they did. Not at a cafe. Not at a hotel. At the bench. Tamara sat first. Brian arrived 10 minutes later, wearing a gray blazer and jeans. No badge. No gun. Just a notebook in one hand, and a bag of lemon scones in the other. He stopped a few feet away. They looked at each other. Older. Changed. But still, somehow, familiar. You still drink that nasty chamomile stuff? He joked. Tamara laughed. Stronger than coffee. He handed her the scones and sat beside her. It took a few moments before either of them spoke. I've been thinking about this bench for a long time, he finally said. Tamara nodded. Me too. They looked out across the park. Joggers passed. An elderly couple fed ducks near the fountain. College students tossed a frisbee nearby. Everything seemed so normal. But to them, the bench was sacred ground. Brian leaned back. I'm not proud of who I was, Tamara. But every day since that morning in Birmingham, I've asked myself, what if you had stood up? What if you hadn't stayed? She turned to him. I didn't stay just for me. I stayed because I needed you to see something. What? That I existed. That I belong. That I wasn't going to let your fear rewrite my presence. He swallowed hard. I see it now. All of it. And I see you. I really do. Tamara placed a hand over his. Warm. Steady. You're not the man who told me to leave anymore. No, he whispered. I hope not. They sat in silence. But it wasn't the old kind, not tense, not painful. It was the silence of two people who had come full circle. Later they walked. Not far. Just a lazy loop around the park's edge. Tamara told him about her nonprofit, a Charleston-based organization providing legal support for women of color facing housing discrimination and medical bias. It was called Still Seated. Brian smiled at the name. He told her about a new project he was launching. The Other Side of the Badge. A podcast sharing anonymous stories from former officers reckoning with past mistakes. They were both still doing the work. Different paths. Same mission. I'm proud of you, Tamara said quietly. You saved me, he replied. As they circled back to the bench, the sun dipped behind the trees. A golden hue spilled over the grass. I have to go soon, he said. I know. But before I do, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small plaque. Bronze. Engraved. He handed it to her. Tamara read it slowly. This bench is dedicated to those who chose to stay seated. To those who resisted, silently. To those who changed us by refusing to disappear. ***. Donated by the city of Birmingham and the Charleston Reconciliation Project. She blinked fast. Brian. I had it made months ago. I asked Charleston's council if they'd allow it here. Took some convincing. But they said yes. He knelt down and gently placed it at the base of the bench. Tamara knelt with him. And together they touched the metal, not as a monument to pain, but to progress. Before he left, Brian turned to her one last time. Tamara, if you ever need someone to sit beside you again, you know where to find me. She smiled. I won't need you to sit. I'll need you to stand beside me. And he nodded. I will. Then he walked away. This time, not with shame or guilt, but with purpose. Tamara remained. On the bench. Watching the world go by. But inside her, nothing was still. Everything was moving. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is not fight, not run, but stay. Stay seated. And wait long enough to be seen.